Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Kaihan, Bizarre Crimes That Shook Japan Volume 2 is now out. If you're interested in learning more about some of the most bizarre, strange, and even terrifying crimes that have taken place in Japan over the last few decades, then make sure to grab your copy now. You can find 25 new cases of missing persons, unsolved mysteries, and truly bizarre crimes that still confuse people today. That's Kaihan, Bizarre Crimes That Shook Japan Volume 2, out now. This week, we're heading to the Kanto region. Not to catch some Pokemon, but to share some terrifying tales from perhaps the most well-known area in all of Japan. First up, a young boy visits a local shrine in Gunma with his grandmother, but when he tries to pray, she suddenly stops him. This shrine, you see, will absolutely grant your wish, but at a great cost. Is that cost really worth it? Find out in The Shrine That Grants Wishes. My grandmother on my mother's side was a deeply religious person. When I was young, I used to visit her house in Gunma, and she would often take my hand and drag me to visit a shrine in the mountains. There's not a single place in Gunma where you can't see mountains. And right behind my mother's family home, there was a mountain too. Graves of locals covered most of this mountain, and it was covered in narrow paths like a spider web. My grandmother said this shrine was dedicated to Kompira-sama. It had a log shrine gate, broken sliding screens, and a veranda that had caved in. It was clear that it wasn't maintained at all. And yet, my grandmother took me there many times, and I followed her up the narrow mountain paths there. My grandmother was especially thankful to this shrine. I think I was 7 or 8 at the time. "Today's a special day," my grandmother said as she took me around to the back of the shabby shrine. It was the first time seeing the back, and although it was daytime, it was rather dark, like evening had already fallen. And there was a narrow path that was just big enough for one person to walk on at a time. We climbed. We descended, and then finally we reached an open area. It was a bright, strange place, with a stone-tiered gallery that almost looked like half a coliseum. Each tier of this gallery had lots of small mortuary tablets and bamboo grass with long strips of paper attached. There was also origami, flowers, and windmills that rotated in the wind. It made me happy. But when I tried to put my hands together in prayer, my grandmother yelled at me. "A powerful kami-sama resides here, so you mustn't pray for anything. If you do, your wish will no doubt be granted. But in return, the kami-sama will require something from you, too." She took me there one more time after that. It hadn't changed and was still brilliantly decorated. It was a beautiful place. When I started junior high school, my grandmother passed away. It was an accident. I was sad, but it was also so sudden that I didn't really feel it. As time passed and I got older, I learnt more about my mother's family from things she told me. Right before my grandmother died, my mother's older brother quit his job at a car maintenance company to start his own business. But because Japan was going through a recession, he was having a rather rough time of it. I was surprised. When I was in high school, my uncle handed me 100,000 yen and told me not to tell anyone about it. That surely meant his business was doing really well, right? According to my mother, before my grandmother died, my uncle's factory, which had been in the red all this time, suddenly had a massive turnaround. I remembered that strange place my grandmother had taken me. Did my grandmother, perhaps, pray there? "I don't care what happens to me, but please, save my son's company." Something like that. That had to be it, I thought. I hadn't been back to that shrine for many years, but I started thinking that I should go again. And so, next time I went to Gunma, I made my way over towards that shrine. It had been a while, so I got a little lost, but eventually I found it. But this wasn't the place I wanted to visit. It was that place. I went around the back, just like we did that day. However, there was no path. There was no sign a path had ever even existed there. I couldn't believe it, and walked around and around looking for it. But there was no path. In disbelief, I asked my mother, my uncle, my grandfather, and my uncle's kids about that place. But they all answered the same way. "I've never heard of such a place." I was scared. Very, very scared. Even as I remember and write this down now, I'm terrified. Ever since then, I haven't even been near that mountain, let alone the shrine on it. In fact, I'm now terrified of mountain paths in general. I don't want to think about how that place might still be in the mountains of Gunma somewhere, but I feel like someday I might suddenly come across it again. At the time, I didn't think there was any wish I would want granted if it came at the cost of my own life. But now, I'm not quite so sure anymore. Supposing I found myself in a dire situation and found myself back at that place, well, just the thought terrifies me. Next, we're heading to a certain railway crossing in Tokyo that's dubbed by the locals as the Granny Crossing. Why? Well, it seems that particular spot is haunted by the ghost of an old woman who just won't go away. But who is she and what does she really want? Find out in Granny Crossing. So, there's this crossing they call the Granny Crossing. And apparently, long ago, an old woman was hit by a train there and died. A friend of mine from high school lived near that crossing, and apparently it was famous amongst the locals as being haunted. So, this old lady's ghost. Apparently, when the barriers raised after the train had passed, that old woman would rise up with them. When you hear that, you might think it's just a joke, and when I heard it, I burst out laughing trying to imagine it. Like, why did the old lady have to go up with the barrier? Where did the old lady go once she was up there? According to my friend, the old lady just disappears as soon as the barrier reaches the top. Anyway, it's a strange crossing where you can't really tell whether it's a funny or a scary story. But the thing that makes it not funny is that if you do actually see that old woman, then she'll possess you. And once she possesses you, you'll be beset by misfortune after misfortune. Just recently, a woman who moved into the area saw the old woman's ghost one night, and after that, she lost her mind and was hospitalized. She then found out her husband was cheating, and they got divorced. There were also several people from the area who were possessed by her long ago and then apparently died. And even after trying to exorcise her several times, she just keeps returning to that crossing. They even tried cleansing the crossing itself, But it's unknown whether the woman is just too strong or the cleansing ceremony didn't work. But either way, it did nothing to get rid of her. And so, the locals don't go near that crossing at night anymore. My friend also doesn't use it at night, even though it's extremely inconvenient. This crossing is a small one on a private line on the outskirts of Tokyo. And now, let's head over to Mount Kumotori, a mountain that stands on the border of Tokyo, Saitama, and Yamanashi prefectures, and is said to be the highest point in all of Tokyo. When a climber decides he wants to see the sunrise from the mountain, he ignores the rain and heads up in the dead of night. But on the way, he encounters something so bizarre he literally can't go any further. But why? Find out in Mount Kumotori. This happened around 15 years ago, when I climbed Mount Kumotori in Nippara, Okutama. I climbed it one night so I could watch the sunrise the next day. I was used to mountain climbing, so I could do it at night as well. That evening, I got off the bus at Higashi Nippara. Unfortunately, it was raining, but the top of the mountain was often clear, even when it rained, and so I kept going. It's still the same now, but once you pass the village at Nippara, there's not a single streetlight. And because rain means clouds, that means no moon or starlight. So if you don't bring your own light, you really can't see a thing. Well, it's not quite that bad maybe, but it's like this massive darkness just surrounds you. Think of it as like, depending on the direction you shine your light, it's like you lose your own arm or leg. To put it bluntly, it's scary. Even though I said I'm used to climbing mountains at night, that's usually when it's clear weather, and you can still kind of see the lights from Tokyo. But this time was different. I really couldn't see anything but darkness. And so, I proceeded up the forest path, shining my light on my own feet every now and then. Huh? Just now, it looked like I didn't have any arms or legs. This time, I looked more closely at the end of my long-sleeved shirt, shining the light on it. My hand was gone. Eh? Honestly, the situation was more confusing than it was frightening, but I fell on my backside. I came back to my senses as the rain soaked through my raincoat and into my pants, and I tried to get up, but I couldn't. When I shone the light on my lower body, I was missing my feet. I couldn't do anything, and so I had to spend the rest of the night just sitting there. I had a foldable umbrella in my backpack, so I could at least protect myself from some of the rain, but it was too cold to sleep. When the sun rose in the morning and it got bright, my hands and feet were there like nothing had ever happened. What on earth happened to me that night? That story of Mount Kumotori reminded me of another terrifying story I heard in the past. It was probably 20 or so years ago now, but 3 guys climbed Mount Kumotori one night to watch the sunrise without telling their parents about it. But in the end, only one of them returned. They triumphantly climbed the mountain as the sun set with just their torches on hand, but the darkness on the mountain at night was just so dark that they started trembling in fear. They fled to a makeshift farming cabin they found, and just like that other guy said, the darkness was perhaps just too much, and one of them went crazy. He raised the blade he brought with him simply to look cool, and then threatened the others with it. One of the men pushed him away and then ran out into the darkness, leaving the other friend and all their stuff behind. The next morning, the police and locals went up to the cabin, not quite sure what to expect. But the man with the blade and the other who had apparently gone to sleep in his sleeping bag were just gone. His shoes and stuff were still there. They had both disappeared, leaving all their stuff behind. There were no traces of blood either. They conducted a rather large search to find them, but by the time I heard this story, they still hadn't been found. It wasn't like they slipped and fell or got separated from each other either. Even thinking about it now gives me chills. It's such a strange story. Sticking with the mountains, the climber in this next story injures himself and takes refuge in an emergency shelter for the night. But while there, he encounters something perhaps not of this world. What really was it? Find out in Plea for Help. There's a mountain pass by the name of Ai in the Kanto area that has an emergency shelter on it. In early autumn, the year before last, I visited a nearby mountain by myself, but I sprained my ankle on the way up. I had planned on just a day trip, but I was forced to spend the night in that shelter instead. I put some newspaper on the ground, used my jacket as a blanket, and I drank some Jack I got from the convenience store before going to bed. That night, I heard a frantic banging on the door, followed by a man's shrill voice. "My friend fell down Mount H! Please help!" he said. Or at least that's what I thought he said. I was still drunk and half asleep, so I didn't really understand what was going on. I told myself I was just imagining things and went back to sleep. The next morning, the swelling had gone down enough for me to walk, and so I left the shelter. When I looked at the front door, I saw a notebook hanging from it. I spent an hour or so flicking through it, and then found the following entry. XX year, XX month, XX day, 2 a.m. I have decided to go to Mount H to rescue a climber in distress. It was the final entry for the day. What happened to the person who wrote it? Thinking about it was too frightening, so I decided to head straight back down the mountain. Leaving the mountains, but sticking with heights, let's head on down to Yokohama, the landmark tower in Yokohama in particular. The woman in this next story works on the 40th floor, but one night when she's working late, she encounters something she can't quite explain. What's really going on? Find out in Landmark Tower Emergency Stairs. You can find the Landmark Tower in Minato Mirai, Yokohama, right? And above a certain floor you can find all sorts of offices. One of my friends from university works for NTT, and her office is on the 40th floor or so. Anyway, being a high-rise building, the floors are accessed by elevator. Even if you want to go down just one floor, you use the elevator. I think it's actually the fastest elevator in the world. It's pretty damn fast. That being said, of course, there are emergency stairs too. These stairs are in the center of the building, and to reach them you have to open a heavy door from the corridor. Apparently, people who aren't close to the elevators use these stairs to go down floors. I heard you can only use those stairs until 8 p.m. though. After that, although you can enter the stairs from the corridor, as soon as the door closes, you can't open it again. So if that happens, you're kinda screwed. You have to call a friend to open the door for you. But in the unfortunate case where you don't have a phone with you, then you have to walk all the way down to the first floor to leave through the service entrance there. So my friend stupidly used those stairs after 10 p.m. one night. But by the time she realized it, it was too late. The door had already shut behind her. And so she prepared herself for the long walk down to the first floor. By the time she'd gone down 10 floors or so, her legs were starting to wobble and her heart pound. She was already feeling faint, and she still had another 30 floors to go. But then, she heard the emergency stairs door opening on that floor. "I'm saved," she thought, and she ran towards the sound. "Excuse me," she called out, and, as she thought, the door was ajar, like someone had just passed through it, and it was beginning to close again. She rushed over and stuck her heel in before it could shut, just managing to get there in time. Thankfully, she only had to walk 10 floors before she could get back to the corridor again. The door had damaged her heel, but she was too happy that she had gotten back inside to care. But then, fear gripped her. First, somebody had just opened the door, but she couldn't see anyone in the hall. Well, it was true there were lots of office doors in the hall, so maybe the person had gone into one of the nearby ones. That person had no doubt thought to enter the emergency stairs, realized the door wouldn't open again behind them, and then went back. There were plenty of reasonable explanations. At any rate, she had to get back to her own floor, so she started walking down the dimly lit corridor towards the elevator. But at this point, she realized something strange again. Her office floor apparently had a nameplate in the hall that said 41W1, NTT Higashi Nihon. However, she couldn't find any nameplates identifying the companies here. Was this floor empty? The economy was in a slump, after all. No, then who opened the door just now then? Come to think of it, the lights on the floor of the hall weren't on. Well, at any rate, she had to get to the elevator. She was so scared by that point that she ran as fast as she could. Finally, she reached the elevator hall. It was truly a modern sight with 8 elevators lined up on both sides. In a tall building like the Landmark Tower, the elevators were divided by floors, like 3rd floor to 35th floor, 35th floor to 45th floor, etc. So at different floors you had to get off and change to another elevator. If I want to go to the 40th floor, then I have to go down to the 3rd first. And so she pressed the down button. But there was no response. She pressed it over and over. But nothing happened. She pressed a different button, and still nothing happened. No way. By this point, she was almost crying. Still, she kept pressing the buttons, this time trying up, but still there was no response. Fear closed in on her from all directions, and she felt like she was about to lose her mind. There was only one thing left that she could do: return to the emergency stairs and walk all the way down to the 1st floor. By this point, she actually was crying. But as she cried, she found herself a little less afraid, And so she went back to the emergency stairs. And so she descended the dimly lit stairs. She didn't feel tired this time though. Down her feet went, one after the other, floor after floor. She wanted to scream, but she kept her reason and instead held the screams back with tears. According to her, if a floor isn't unlocked, then you need a special employee card to get the elevators on that floor to move. Otherwise, they won't work. She thought it was all a bunch of coincidences that happened at once. In modern buildings like that, when there's nobody on a floor anymore, the elevators will detect when the doors are locked and won't work, even if you push the buttons. It's for security reasons. The person who opened the door must have hurried out because they were the last person there. When I asked her why they would have opened the emergency stairs door, however, she had no answer for me. She had just convinced herself that there was some reason for it, even if she didn't know what that reason was. Sorry for such a long story. If you work at the Landmark Tower, then you should be careful as well. Moving to Saitama, there's an old legend of a Nue, a creature said to have the head of a monkey, the body of a tanuki, the legs of a tiger, and a snake for a tail, that lives in a nearby cave. But is it really just a legend? Find out in Nue Mound. Long, long ago, around the upper reaches of the Arakawa Dam in Chichibu, there was a small settlement roughly 3 houses large called Itsuzami. The residents of this settlement, who had been ostracized, took part in open-air burials, which had been banned around the start of the Showa era. There was a legend that a Nue cleanly ate the flesh off the bodies left for open-air burial in a nearby cave, leaving behind nothing but bones. They also had a custom of gathering those bones, washing them, and then putting them in an urn. Around the time Japan entered its period of rapid economic growth, rumors spread of a creepy voice you could hear from an air shelter that was used during the war, near where my father lived. One day, 3 young men who had been drinking decided to visit that air raid shelter for a test of courage. When they returned, they brought with them the carcass of a large mysterious beast. They showed it off to the locals, claiming they had exterminated the monster, and this was its true form. But a few days later, the man who delivered the fatal blow suddenly died. They held a funeral for him and then cremated him, but for some reason, there were no bones left. He turned entirely to ash. Rumors spread that it was a curse, and unable to watch people fighting over it, a powerful local man announced that it was a mistake by the crematorium, and gave the grieving family some condolence money. But after that, powerful locals then built a small mound next to that air raid shelter dedicated to the beast. The locals called it the Nue Mound, but after it was sunk in the dam, nobody ever spoke of it publicly. I heard this story before my father passed away, and I thought it sounded rather superstitious, so I didn't really believe it. But after my father passed away, I realized something during his funeral. At the funerals of relatives from his side of the family, we had never once taken part in the ceremony to collect the bone remains after the bodies had been burnt. A family in Chiba finds something odd in their grandfather's yard when cleaning up his belongings after he passed. Something they still can't quite explain. Find out what in Jizzos in the Garden. About 3 years ago, my half-senile 80-year-old grandfather died. He was a stubborn old man who said he refused to accept help from his son and his wife. Instead, he lived alone in a house that was also around 70 years old or so. Because they were going to tear that house down after he died, we went there to sort out all of his belongings. The yard was an absolute mess. There were so many weeds that it was hard to take stuff out of the house. So first, I decided to deal with that. And as I was pruning, I kicked a stone and fell over. What the hell? I thought. And as I stood up, I looked at the stone peeking out of the ground. It seemed to have ears. Looking closer, it wasn't just ears. It had a whole face. Digging around the stone, it turned out that it was a really, really old Jizzo statue. But there wasn't just one. I ended up digging out 6 in total from this honestly rather small yard. Everyone was kind of creeped out by them. But my mother alone was staring at the forehead of one of the statues. Then her face went pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. "This Jizzo. My name is carved on its forehead." We wiped the dirt off them and, looking closer, they really did have all our names on them in hiragana. The carving was kind of messy, so it was no doubt Grandpa himself who did it. But recently, I've been thinking that there was no way that old man could carry and bury this many Jizzo statues all by himself. And as a side note, my grandmother died 2 years after giving birth to my father. And even though she was buried when he was young, her grandchild's name was on that statue. I just don't get it. It's not like anything in particular happened to us after that, though. And although it no longer exists anymore, that house was in Chiba. Sticking with Chiba, a young man on his way home from the club notices a woman who also seems to be on her way home. She's staggering around like she's drunk and heading for the train just like him. But is she really drunk? And is she perhaps even really human? Find out in Early Morning Scary Story. This happened to me around 1 year ago. I was on my way home from a club in Chiba during the summer. I had to catch the first train of the day, so I left the club a little earlier than everyone else and walked towards the station. The sun was just starting to rise, and there were almost no cars or people around. About 10 meters ahead of me, there was a woman who was maybe on her way home from the club as well. She was staggering around like she was drunk, and I continued to walk behind her at a safe distance. She had only one shoe on, and her footsteps sounded like that of a mule. She must have been drinking and dancing, and then she left just like that, I thought. And when we reached the station, suddenly the woman took off running and disappeared. She had been walking without a shoe for quite some time, so I wondered if she was okay as I climbed the stairs. When I reached the platform, there were 2 or 3 people there, but I didn't see her amongst them. Ugh. Was she a ghost? Worked up, I called my friend and was like, "I just saw a ghost." We laughed about it as I waited for the train, and when it finally arrived, I hung up and got on the middle car. As soon as I stepped on board, a surprised gasp escaped my lips. That woman from earlier was there. She was already on the train. She lay draped across the seat, looking at the ground with just one shoe on and her hand resting on the handrail. I was too scared to move, but I tried desperately to get off the train. However, all the doors then closed. I was honestly terrified. I decided to get off at the next station and wait for the next train there. I didn't know if that woman was alive or a ghost, but I sat far away from her and sent my friend a message with shaky hands. "What does she look like?" my friend replied, but she was looking at the ground with her hair hanging down, so I couldn't see. Plus, I was too scared to look properly anyway. I decided to call my friend to talk directly to him, but then, suddenly, the woman hit her head against the window. When I turned to look at her, she was staring right at me. She had lifted her head and was looking at me with her mouth half open. She was sitting about 5 meters away, but we were the only people on the car, so I knew she was looking at me. Her mouth opened and closed, almost like she was an announcer practicing how to speak quickly. We continued looking at each other, and, looking closely, it seemed something like blood and saliva were dripping from the corner of her mouth. No doubt about it, she's dead, I thought. More and more blood dripped from her mouth, and with her chin stained red, blood dripped from her nose too. "I'm so sorry," I silently chanted, my breathing becoming ragged and tears filling my eyes. "Now arriving at something something. Please change here for the something something lines." As soon as I heard the announcement, I jumped off the train. I quickly turned around and looked inside, and that woman was still staring at me. Then the train left. Something felt strange, so I looked down and saw I was holding a shoe in my left hand. And on the train, that woman's devilish face was stuck to the window, her mouth gaping like a fish as she looked at me. I fell to the ground on the spot. I later heard an interesting story. If you see a strange woman on the train, you must not look her in the eye. If you do, then you will definitely run into her again. Meaning, you will apparently be possessed. This time, let's head to Ibaraki. A man on a business trip hears a terrifying scream while at his hotel, but it seems only one other person there also notices it. But who screamed and why did no one else hear it? Find out in Origin of the Scream. Seven or 8 years ago, I visited Shimotsuma in Ibaraki Prefecture for business. I stayed in an area a short drive from the business district. They had hot springs and local beer, and everything was new and clean as though it had just been built. After soaking in the hot springs and drinking some local beer, I was feeling really good, so I watched the live baseball game on TV in the lobby. There were another 4 or 5 people there, also doing their own thing. But then suddenly, I heard what sounded like a woman's scream. It didn't come from the TV. What the hell? I thought, looking around, but I couldn't see anything amiss. But something else was weird. It seemed nobody else had heard that scream. Confused, I looked around again, and then I locked eyes with a woman. Did she also hear it? I wondered as she stared at me. I silently nodded, and then the woman walked over to me. "What was that?" she whispered. "It doesn't look like anyone else heard it." I mean, I had no idea what that was either. "It seemed to come from over there," I said, pointing to the car park outside. The scream really did seem to have come from over there, but the car park was rather large. And although there were lights, it was still quite dark. The woman peeked at it from the lobby before asking something unbelievable. "Do you want to check it out?" Unfortunately, the woman was young and beautiful, so it wouldn't be very manly of me to scream that I absolutely did not want to go outside. And so, with an ulterior motive in mind, we went outside together. The parking lot was on the other side of the road that passed between it and the hotel entrance. Nervously, we crossed the road and then walked over towards it. Then, the woman pointed at something. "Over there," she said. I turned to look and there was an RV in the car park. "A car?" I asked. "No. Beneath it. What's that?" Looking closer, there was something under the RV. Something human. It looked like a person lying on the ground, struggling. That scream we heard, was it this person being attacked? Thinking they might be injured, I rushed over. "Wait!" the woman called out before I'd gone too far. I turned around and she seemed to be trembling. What is that?" My eyesight is pretty bad, so I couldn't see it clearly, but the person seemed to be lying face down. I have to hurry, I thought, picking up the pace. But after 4 or 5 steps, I stopped. That person was crawling towards me, but at a glance, the way they moved wasn't very human. This isn't right, I thought. And then the person on the ground lifted their face to look at me. Instinctively, I knew that I shouldn't look them in the eye, so I fled back to the hotel. On the way, I grabbed the woman's hand as she stood there frozen and dragged her inside with me. Inside the hotel, nothing had changed. If anything, a few people turned to look at us as we ran in out of breath, and that was it. Did it follow us? I don't know. Nervously, I turned around and looked through the glass of the automatic doors, but I couldn't see anything. Relieved, the two of us sat on the ground right then and there. Exhausted, we then each returned to our rooms, but I was too scared to sleep, so I left the lights on and watched TV until morning. Around 8 a.m, I made my way to the front desk to check out, and there I saw a staff member wiping the door with a confused look on his face. "What's wrong?" I asked, and he said there were handprints on the outside of the glass that he just couldn't get rid of. Looking closer, there were some sticky handprints on the bottom half of the door. Remembering what happened the night before, a chill ran down my spine and I checked out as soon as possible. But it wasn't until later that I realized I had forgot to ask that woman for her contact details. Ah, what a waste. Finally this week, a young man shares a tale from his hometown in Gunma that parents tell their children to get them to go to sleep at night. But it seems this one might not just be a fairy tale. Find out why in 10 O'Clock Monk. When I was in my 20s, a man from Gunma started work at the same place as me. I had worked there for the longest, so I was generally in charge of assigning work to the part-timers and helping them get used to the job. During a break one day, the man who had washed in from Gunma suddenly told me his life story. He said that his family were once rather wealthy silkworm farmers, but times had been tough, and so the family members basically had all gone their separate ways. As for him, he found an apartment in Tokyo and was drifting from job to job. I sat there and listened as he told me about all his worries with having no family around. And then he told me a story that his mother used to share with him before bedtime each night. A story about the 10 O'Clock Monk. Apparently, people in rural farming villages in Gunma go to bed really early. He said this is because there's nothing to do at night out there. And so, if he also didn't want to go to bed early, then his mother would warn him. Once the clock hits 10, the 10 O'Clock Monk will appear. It was a silly threat that didn't have much of a lasting effect. And that night, he stayed up late, hidden under his blanket. But then, as the old grandfather clock struck 10, one of the boards in the dark ceiling cracked open, and a pitch-black figure slithered down the nearby pillar. Then, he spoke to my colleague in his bed. "Well, it's 10 o'clock. How can I help you?" He was so scared that he apparently just trembled in fear under his blanket. And as he did, the man then slithered back up the pillar and then disappeared into the dark hole in the ceiling planks. The next morning, he told his mother about the terrifying experience he had the night before. "See? I told you. He takes children who don't go to sleep into the ceiling with him," she said, but she refused to elaborate any more than that. After that, he started going to bed early, but after a while, he grew more and more curious about what that thing really was. He needed to know. He asked his mother and grandmother about it whenever he could, but they refused to ever tell him anything relevant. And so one night, he decided to stay up late to see the 10 O'Clock Monk again. Then, finally, the grandfather clock struck 10. He stared at the ceiling, and then one of the boards creaked open. Once again, the 10 O'Clock Monk slithered down the pillar, and then, as he looked right at my colleague, he approached him. "Well, it's 10 o'clock. How can I help you?" And so, he decided to try something. "I want sushi," he said. And the 10 O'Clock Monk returned to the ceiling without saying or doing anything else. The next morning, they received a sudden visitor, and that evening, they had some sushi delivered to the house. A massive thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Just Sawn, Emerald and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Kaihan, Bizarre Crimes That Shook Japan Volume 2, out on Amazon right now. And check out our merchandise store at kawabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kawabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kawabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.